Okay, so have you ever, like, imagined what Europe would look like today if it had stayed a single empire?
Well, a lot of people are curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, you sent us a ton of material on Charlemagne, so I think you're probably as fascinated as I am by this guy
Oh, yeah.
who basically did just that, at least for a time.
He did.
Today, we're going on a deep dive into the world of Charlemagne, the
Yeah.
so-called father of Europe. We'll be exploring his family's kind of cunning rise to power, all those brutal conquests, and then that controversial crowning as emperor.
Mm-hmm.
Get ready for political intrigue, religious fervor, and, we'll be looking at the foundation of a continent.
It's fascinating, isn't it? To really get Charlemagne, we need to go all the way back to 8th century Europe.
Okay.
Imagine instead of all those neat little nation states we see today, you have like a patchwork of kingdoms, alliances that are constantly shifting and never-ending power struggles.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very different world.
And right in the middle of it all is the Frankish kingdom, right? The biggest player in the game, but kind of held together by this, fading Merovingian dynasty.
Right.
Who weren't known for their, strong leadership.
That's where the story gets really interesting, I think, because it's in that power vacuum that Charlemagne's family, the Carolingians, they maneuvered their way to the top.
Yeah.
It's not like they inherited it, they really crafted it, generation by generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's trace that journey, starting with Charlemagne's great-grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
Pepin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was a master of playing the long game, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Pepin, he held the real power. He was the mayor of the palace. Think of it as like the power behind the throne.
Oh, wow.
Controlling those Merovingian kings,
Yeah.
pulling all the strings in the kingdom.
Okay.
And that set the precedent for the whole Carolingian family.
Yeah.
It was like their blueprint for ambition and influence, and also a pretty good amount of ruthlessness.
And then comes, Charles Martel, Charlemagne's grandfather,
Yeah.
a man who really lived up to his nickname, the Hammer.
Yeah.
He wasn't afraid to use force to get what he wanted.
Yeah. Charles Martel, he was a brilliant military strategist.
Yeah.
And he knew how to, secure loyalty. He'd reward his supporters with these, strategic land grants. But he also knew how to kind of play with fire.
Okay.
He'd manipulate church holdings to increase his own wealth and influence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely made him powerful, but it also, sowed some seeds of controversy.
Right, so he's building this foundation of power, but maybe not on solid ground.
Right.
And then his son, Pepin the Short, takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And he continued with this expansion, but with a really fascinating twist.
Mm-hmm.
He realized that the path to lasting power involved getting the church on his side.
Precisely. Pepin the Short, he really understood legitimacy, and he
Yeah.
very carefully cultivated a relationship with the papacy, the office of the Pope in Rome.
Mm.
And he went so far as to get the Pope to not only crown him king, but to crown his sons as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, talk about securing the future, right?
Yeah, that's some strategic thinking right there.
Yeah.
So imagine young Charlemagne growing up in this environment.
Yeah.
It wasn't your average childhood. He's at this multilingual court, immersed in military training, but also he's exposed to this kind of emerging intellectual scene.
And what's really remarkable is that even though Charlemagne, he might not have even been able to write.
Wow, really?
He was super sharp. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge,
Yeah.
He became a master of strategy, a skilled politician, and also a shrewd diplomat.
And that preparation really paid off. He didn't just sit back and enjoy, his inherited power.
Right.
Charlemagne was a man of action. He was driven, really ambitious, and that led him to expand his kingdom through these relentless military campaigns.
Yeah, he waged wars of expansion, conquering the Lombard kingdom in Italy. He even ventured into Spain. And then there's his 40-year campaign against the Saxons. It was brutal, marked by forced conversions to Christianity.
Yeah.
It definitely shows the kind of darker side of his reign.
So we see this complex figure emerging. He's this brilliant military leader. He's shrewd, but he can also be ruthless in achieving his goals.
Mm-hmm.
But Charlemagne wasn't just about brute force, was he?
No, not at all.
He understood that true power lay in unifying his vast and diverse realm, and he saw culture and religion as vital tools to achieving that.
Absolutely. Think about those grand palaces he built,
Yeah.
showcasing Roman treasures. He standardized laws, oaths of loyalty, all sworn on the Bible.
Right.
He was weaving religion into the very fabric of his kingdom.
Yeah.
And let's not forget his efforts to kind of define a distinctly Western Christianity, further setting his empire apart.
It sounds like he was creating a vision, not just conquering land.
Exactly.
He was shaping an identity.
Conquering hearts and minds was just as important as conquering territory. He was laying the groundwork for a unified Christian empire, a vision that really resonated throughout Europe.
But even with all of that vision,
Yeah.
all of that strategic maneuvering, there's this pivotal moment, Christmas Day, in Rome, 800 AD.
Mm-hmm.
The Pope crowns Charlemagne emperor. I mean, that wasn't just a symbolic gesture, was it?
Oh, no, it was huge. I mean, politically, symbolically,
Yeah.
this decision to crown Charlemagne emperor sent shockwaves through Europe. It really fueled debates about the nature of rulership and the relationship between the church and state that still continue today.
So Charlemagne finds himself at the pinnacle of power. He's conquered tons of land. He's emperor. He's reshaping the map of Europe. I mean, you'd think no one would dare challenge him at this point, but there were cracks beneath the surface, weren't there?
Well, remember, power, it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
Charlemagne had several sons, and managing their ambition, well, that proved to be way more challenging than conquering kingdoms.
Yeah.
He tried to carefully distribute power, granting them these sub-kingships in different regions.
Right.
It was almost like he was trying to, contain a wildfire by scattering embers.
And that seems like a strategy that could backfire spectacularly.
Well, we'll delve more into that in the next part of our deep dive, but let's just say that even the most meticulously crafted plans can unravel when you're dealing with ambition and family ties.
Oh, I can imagine.
Welcome back. It's easy to kind of get caught up in the big picture of, conquests and empires.
Right.
But behind all of those sweeping historical events, there are these fascinating stories of individuals, their motivations, the kind of messy realities of power.
That's what makes history so captivating, right? It's not just dates and battles. It's about the people who shaped those events.
Exactly.
And in Charlemagne's case, his family played a pretty big role in both, his successes and his struggles.
Exactly. And we left off talking about Charlemagne's, attempts to manage his son's ambitions.
Right.
It wasn't just about keeping peace within the family. These relationships, they had a direct impact on the stability of the whole empire.
It makes you wonder, with all the planning that went into building this empire, did Charlemagne ever think that his family would cause him so much trouble?
Well, remember, this was a time when marriage was just as much a political strategy as it was, a personal bond.
Right.
Charlemagne's multiple wives, they weren't just romantic partners.
Okay.
They were strategic alliances, connections to powerful families and key regions throughout his realm.
So these weren't just weddings. These were power plays.
Precisely. Every single marriage was a strategic move for Charlemagne.
Yeah.
A way to consolidate his power, expand his influence, and, ideally prevent his empire from falling apart.
But as we know, even the most, carefully constructed webs can be torn apart.
Mm-hmm.
And in Charlemagne's case, the thread started to come loose within his own family.
Right.
He had several rebellions, the biggest one being led by his son, Pippin, in the 790s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this wasn't some little argument. This was a challenge to his authority.
Yeah. Pippin's rebellion, it's a fascinating example of how complex power and family can be.
Right.
Remember those rules around marriage and legitimacy we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, Pippin had been excluded from the line of succession,
Okay.
Labeled illegitimate. But it wasn't just a personal thing that fueled his rebellion.
Okay.
It tapped into a much deeper unease, especially among some Frankish nobles. They were really starting to feel uncomfortable with Charlemagne's growing power.
So it was like this perfect storm.
Mm-hmm.
Personal resentment and political anxiety all rolled into one. I mean, it must have been a real blow to Charlemagne to face this kind of challenge from his own family.
Absolutely. And it shows that even with all his victories and his imperial title, Charlemagne wasn't all-powerful.
Yeah.
He couldn't just, force people to be loyal, even his own sons.
Right.
He constantly had to negotiate, balance different interests, and sometimes, he had to use force to maintain control.
It sounds exhausting.
Oh, for sure. It was a constant balancing act.
And all of that must have taken its toll, especially when you think about the future of his empire.
Yeah. You've hit on a major challenge Charlemagne faced. As he got older, the question of, who would take over became more and more important.
Right.
Who was going to inherit this vast and complex empire?
Right.
How could he make sure it stayed stable after he was gone?
That's a problem that so many leaders have faced throughout history.
I know, right? The founder, the strong leader, builds this amazing thing, but then what happens next?
Exactly.
How do you guarantee the next generation won't destroy it all?
So how did Charlemagne try to deal with that?
Well, he tried a couple of things. He divided his empire among his sons, granting them these sub-kingships, kind of like what his own father did for him.
Okay.
It was a way to give them, experience with power and responsibility and hopefully keep them happy.
Yeah.
He also formalized the rules of succession,
Okay.
tried to, establish a clear line of inheritance to avoid disputes later on.
It sounds like he was trying to learn from past mistakes.
Yeah.
Create a system that would last. Did it work?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. Despite his best efforts, Charlemagne's sons, well, they weren't always on board with his plans.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Charlemagne. I gotta say, all of this material you've given us, Charlemagne's story, it just keeps getting more and more interesting.
Yeah.
We've seen his rise to power, the conquests, those efforts to shape a unified Christian empire.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've learned, power, even in the hands of a guy like Charlemagne, it's never absolute.
Right. Power's always changing. It's dynamic.
Yeah.
And for Charlemagne, that really became clear as he got closer to the end of his reign.
Yeah.
Remember, even though he tried to, manage his son's ambitions and create this stable system of succession,
Right.
it didn't really go as planned.
Things were about to get kind of messy.
You could say that.
Yeah.
Remember how meticulously Charlemagne divided his empire between his sons?
Yeah.
Hoping to kind of, appease their ambitions and prevent any future conflict.
Right.
It was almost like he was handing them, weapons and just hoping they wouldn't use them on each other.
And did they? Did Charlemagne's attempts to control the future backfire?
Things rarely go according to plan,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with ambition and family on that scale.
Right.
So after Charlemagne died in 814, his son, Louis the Pious, inherited the whole empire.
Okay.
Now, despite that nickname, Louis, he wasn't really known for being decisive
Oh.
or for his ability to control his own sons.
So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Right.
The cycle continues.
Exactly. Louis had tons of problems, including rebellions from his own sons.
Wow.
They all wanted their piece of the empire.
So much for the stability and unity that Charlemagne worked so hard to create.
Yeah.
Did it just fall apart?
In a way, yes. Those seeds of division that Charlemagne tried so hard to contain, they grew into this full-blown conflict.
Wow.
And after Louis died in 840, his sons, they went to war with each other.
Oh.
A brutal, bloody war. Each of them wanted to control the empire.
It's almost like something out of Shakespeare,
Yeah.
this massive empire built on ambition and conquest and then destroyed by those same things.
It's definitely got a tragic element to it.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is that even though the empire fractured, Charlemagne's legacy, it didn't disappear.
Oh,
It had a lasting impact on European history.
so how did that happen? How did a ruler whose empire fell apart so quickly, how did his legacy last?
Well, remember all those efforts Charlemagne made to kind of promote scholarship, to control the historical narrative.
Yeah.
That was a good investment. He basically became a mythical figure, a symbol of a lost era of unity and strength.
So he was like the legend.
Exactly. Rulers throughout history, from the Holy Roman Emperors to Napoleon, they used Charlemagne's name to legitimize their own power.
Whoa.
He was a model of leadership, a symbol of imperial authority, an inspiration for anyone who dreamed of a unified Europe.
That's pretty impressive for a guy whose empire didn't even survive a generation after his death.
It shows how powerful ideas and symbols can be. Even though his empire crumbled, that vision he represented, the idea of a unified Christian Europe, it really captured people's imaginations for centuries.
So even though, politically, he wasn't successful long-term, the cultural impact, it was huge.
Definitely. And let's not forget the Carolingian Renaissance.
Right.
That flourishing of art, literature, learning that Charlemagne supported. It had this massive impact on European culture.
Yeah.
It was the foundation for future intellectual and artistic achievements.
So we see Charlemagne as this kind of complex figure,
Mm-hmm.
someone who was both brilliant and brutal,
Yeah.
a conqueror, a reformer, a patron of the arts, and, a father struggling to control his sons.
And through it all, he left behind this legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire us.
Absolutely.
His story reminds us that history isn't just dates and names, but it's a story of ambition and conflict and, the power of ideas.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
We've explored Charlemagne's world, from the huge scale of his conquest down to the really personal details of his family. And we've seen how his legacy continues to shape how we understand European history. Hopefully you've enjoyed going back in time with us.
And remember, history is massive.
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, more to discover.
So keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep those deep dives coming.
We'll be here to help you navigate it all.
Absolutely.